which is the regional high-level dialogue with Latin America and the Caribbean region. Let me introduce myself. I'm Javier Suraski. I work at CEPE, which is a think tank with a presence in Latin America and the Caribbean. We work on global agendas. It's an honor for me to be part of a panel that will clarify what is happening and what the opportunities are in Latin America and the Caribbean when it comes to the effectiveness of development cooperation. We have Milana Pereira, who is the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs from El Salvador. We have José Luis Murillo Frias, Director of International Cooperation, Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Dominican Republic. We have Ms. Molinas from the Secretariat for Economic Development of Paraguay. Cindy Mendoza, Undersecretary of International Cooperation and Promotion at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Honduras. Daniel Castillo Carnilla is the Technical Secretary of the Ibero-American Program for the Strengthening of South-South Cooperation. And Fassia Pusterla is the representative in Europe of the Inter-American Development Bank. We have José Antonio Norris, head of the Peruvian International Cooperation Agency, and last but not least, Álvaro Calderón Ponce de León, Director for International Cooperation at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Colombia. Without further ado, because we really have some highly experienced panelists here to share with us during this regional dialogue, I would like to give the floor to Mr. José Antonio González Norris, head of the Peruvian International Cooperation Agency, to hear his introduction.
Apreciados colegas.
Vice Ministers, dear colleagues, it's a great pleasure for me to welcome you and to thank you for being with us for this regional high-level dialogue on Latin America and the Caribbean, organized by the Peruvian International Cooperation Agency, APSI, which I represent, and the government of Colombia and its Ministry of Foreign Affairs as part of this Effective Development Cooperation Summit. We have a number of distinguished panelists from various countries across the region gathered together for a dialogue on effective development cooperation and its presence in Latin America, and also what are the alternatives for building more effective development cooperation that takes account of the realities that our countries are facing as we begin to build back after the pandemic. We know that the pandemic and the systemic crises that have flown from it have highlighted the gaps in our socio and economic systems. This is a consequence of a lack of attention to services, to public services in previous years. As a result of this crisis, we have seen that the international cooperation system is fragile, it's asymmetrical, and it shows that we need extensive reforms in our development cooperation system. As we build back after the pandemic, it is therefore clear that Latin America and the Caribbean must work together to tackle these global challenges and to promote renewed international cooperation that is different from what we have seen in the decades before. We must also work for sustainable recovery and inclusive economic development. This means that we must address development financing issues in the countries in this region, where this has become increasingly disconnected from the socio-economic needs. Paradoxically, this is a situation that could actually spark an unprecedented new situation with a reform of our existing system. Our region must work to strengthen international capacity, promote sustainable progress on this, promote partnerships, and to seek new opportunities for financing in Latin America and in the Caribbean. This will clearly mean that we have to optimize every contribution, all the resources that we have available, not just international development cooperation, but also South-South and triangular cooperation. Clearly, we must continue to appeal to various international fora for more cooperation resources. But we also need effective mechanisms, and we must boost the quality of this cooperation and in line with the agenda that is promoted by the Global Partnership in Peru. We have seen the positive effects of this agenda from the outset. Recently, the new policy for international technical cooperation for 2030 is in the process of being adopted, and it is aimed at boosting the effectiveness of cooperation. In Peru, which is a beneficiary of this cooperation, which also participates in it, it's very important that this includes our national priorities and that it also includes South-South and triangular cooperation. So this summit is not only an opportunity for us to renew our commitment to effective development cooperation and the principles promoted by the Global Partnership, but also to promote the Global Partnership's agenda in our region. This includes inclusive governance systems as a contribution to development in the countries of our region. Thank you. I thank José Antonio González Norris of Peru, and I now give the floor to the various panelists. As moderator, it is my job, if necessary, to interrupt you, and I apologize to the panelists if I do have to do it. And I would like to thank the audience here in the room for being here with us and for taking part. Each panelist will have 3 minutes to answer an initial question. And we will hear from all the panelists about what do you see as the main challenge faced by countries in the region when it comes to driving truly effective development cooperation. And I'd like to ask, first of all, Ms. Adriana Mira de Pereira, the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of El Salvador, what she thinks about this. You have 3 minutes. Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. I think that this is an extremely interesting question. And I think this has already been said in other panels, and I won't repeat it. We've spoken about the very sad effects of the pandemic and its impact that has restricted cooperation, which was already facing a lot of challenges. But I think the pandemic has also forced us to rethink cooperation. Countries that habitually assisted countries like ours are now attending to their own needs first. So I think it's important to recognize that we are now in a phase where we have to continue to build and strengthen, building on the SDGs. And we only have 7 years left, and we are not on track. We're not even close to being on track to achieving them. El Salvador recognizes that we need support, but that we are also standing ready to help, especially in South-South technical cooperation, which we're already involved in. I think it's also important that we promote and establish a global action plan for cooperation for middle-income countries to boost investment in social services and economic development in order to reduce the divides that exist already in our countries. I also think that we have to recognize where we've made mistakes, because that's how we can start to correct them. As Vice Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, I can see that there's still a lot of disconnection in the decision-making processes within the UN, here in Switzerland, here in UN, very disconnected from the reality in our countries. And I think that is where we need to look at governance. Another big challenge that El Salvador faces, and I'd like to thank the UN offices in our country for their initiative there, is that we need to work not just taking account of civil society, but also of government plans, because governments have 5-year or 4-year plans in which they've laid out the requirements and specified which areas they're going to support to meet these needs. It's very important that we take account of this. And as a region, we also need to recognize that we have progress to make when it comes to coordinating cooperation. I think we also have to look at what we can do in Central America and in Latin America to identify the key requirements, not just in each individual country, but as a region. I'm a great admirer of CARICOM and how they have dealt with this. And I think that this is how we could perhaps work together to have more focused cooperation. So I think we as Latin America have to unite here. Thank you very much. And let me now give the floor to José Luis María Frias, Director of International Cooperation at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Dominican Republic. 3 minutes. Thank you very much. Likewise, as my colleague from El Salvador said, I believe we need to start by looking at the international cooperation context, as this is now starting to shift to other parts of the world where the needs are the greatest. The fact is that most of the countries in the region are middle-income countries, and as a result of that, we are having to rethink the cooperation process. Now, it is clear that the type of cooperation has changed as we become middle-income countries, but we also have to recognize the historical challenges that have still not been resolved and where we still need cooperation. One of the things we've been looking at in the Dominican Republic is setting up some kind of regional unity so that we can work together and look at how we can build and develop processes that will support cooperation for development based on the shared needs that we have across the region. Now, the pandemic has illustrated all of this, where we had to sit down and plan how we could source vaccines, for example, to address the challenges that we had. And this is it was a very tangible experience of the lack of unity that we had. And I think it's very important that we start looking at our own situation. We need to have a strategy that will help us to tackle the challenges that we face when it comes to international cooperation. Thank you very much for sticking to time as well. That's making my job a lot easier. Let's now hear from Viviana Casco Molinas, Minister and Executive Secretary of the Technical Secretariat for Planning and Socioeconomic Development of Paraguay. Thank you very much. Let me thank all the organizers as well, thank all the panelists. There are 3 points that I would like to raise, which are key to my country. As my colleague from El Salvador said, the first one is this need to align our national development plans with the global challenges that we have. This is crucial. Development cooperation has to be aligned with the national priorities and local priorities on the ground. We have a national development plan that dates from 2014. We have a vision all the way up to 2030. And 92% of it is aligned with the SDGs. We believe that it is essential that we work in a coordinated manner because we do not want to duplicate our efforts. And we need to bear this in mind nationally, but also at regional level. Another point I wanted to make is about monitoring and follow-up. Paraguay has a monitoring commission for the SDGs. It's an interinstitutional commission. We have 17 different institutions coordinating their efforts together. And we also have a strategic committee with these 17 institutions involved as well. We also have the National Institute for Statistics, which supports the entire process because it coordinates and works with the National Development Plan. It helps to monitor these plans and to calculate indicators that allow us to monitor progress towards the SDGs. This allows us to have an information management system that supports democratic governance. With all these different institutions that are contributing to this system, it allows us to monitor our work towards the SDGs and also to monitor the implementation of the National Development Plan. The third point I wanted to raise on this panel is about different reporting mechanisms. Since 2016 in Paraguay, we have a strategic or rather technical committee, which is an institutional committee for cooperation, and my organization is part of that, along with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Ministry of Finance. And so we all work together on our international cooperation policy as we making progress on this. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed.
Cindy Rodríguez Mendoza, subsecretaria de Cooperación y Promoción Internacional de la Secretaría de Relaciones Exteriores y Cooperación Internacional de Honduras. Bienvenida.
Muy buenas tardes a todos y todas. Buenas tardes, compañeros panelistas. Pongo en el centro de esta discusión a Honduras porque Honduras viene atravesando una multicrisis producto de las políticas neoliberales durante 3 décadas y un golpe de Estado que logró la instalación de una narcodictadura donde se profundizó la...
As well, and this deepened poverty, inequality, problems of human rights, and the increase also of our debt. 74% of our population is below the poverty line, and our country is one of the poorest countries in the region. But a year ago, through a democratic process, the first time we have a woman president, and in favor of the popular struggle. And so as a government, we are seeking to rebuild the system. We want to have an economic, political, and social model which will transform the state through a new policy, a policy that's ethical, it's human, political, and that respects difference in the area of nature and also the outlook of our people, focusing our efforts on education, health, environment, food, and job security. And so, in view of the crisis, we've had to rise to a number of challenges. One of them is to have international cooperation. International cooperation must be led by the government under a number of priorities that have been set by our partners. And on the basis of the government's plan, there has to be an ongoing, transparent dialogue with the field of academia, private enterprises, and cooperation and other entities as well. That is in keeping with the 2030 agenda and also the Paris Climate Agreement as well. And we have to have sustainable development for small governments that are competitive as well, with infrastructure and proper funding, and focusing on the principle of self-determination of people. And so if we want to have inclusive, sustainable development, they have to look at things at the territorial level and the local level as well. have to have public policy. We're discussing different cross-cutting issues. This is questions of gender and race as well, and social class. And so we have to generate cooperation that will drive forward the question of equality, justice, and the freedom of each and every one of our citizens. And also look for proper funding mechanisms that are accessible and streamlining the formalities as well to meet the needs of new types of cooperation, South-South cooperation, private development cooperation as well, and also which is knowledge-based. Thank you very much indeed. Now I'll be handing over the floor to Daniel Castillo, Technical Secretary of the Ibero-American Program for the Strengthening of South-South Cooperation. Daniel, thank you. I'd like to thank you for the invitation and a warm greetings to all the panelists and friends who are with me. There can be no doubt that the challenges that have been raised in the question can be looked at from a number of different angles. But from the standpoint of the countries of Ibero-America, Spain and Latin America, I think we should be looking at things from the systemic basis as well. There's the need to promote a cooperation system, international cooperation system that's truly inclusive in nature and that will generate a number of incentives in favor of sustainable development. And this means we have to also focus on middle-income countries, the countries of our region, and also those countries that are graduating, moving upward into a higher level of income. As I see it, driving forward efficient cooperation, well, in order to do so, we're going to have to, amongst other things, have a collective response to the challenges related to development. There must not be any exclusions. We have to deepen capacities, institutional strength as well, initiatives for international cooperation, and also coordinate policies at a number of different levels. We must not be leaving anybody behind. Well, this means we have to reform the role and the place occupied by middle-income countries in the international scheme of things. And we have to focus on the needs that in countries and between countries, middle-income countries, we've seen that there are a number of the effects of the pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic, and we're talking about countries. Some countries are still facing challenges. Some have been left very fragile, and there are a number of problems with migratory flows, climate change as well. This will require the support of cooperation, but also the contribution of middle-income countries is key in nature if we want to have sustainable development through South-South cooperation, triangular cooperation as well. And we have to focus on the most vulnerable of citizens. And finally, in this context, I believe that something that's very important is the role played by triangular cooperation and laying the basis for a model, relational model between traditional donors, to put it that way, and, for example, middle-income countries, such as we see in Latin America, building bridges between traditional cooperation and South-South cooperation. And this is a point of convergence, which allows us to bring forward alliances, strike alliances, and bring forward alliances that are more just and stronger. Thank you, Daniel. Now, hearing from Fasya Pustarla, representative in Europe of the Inter-American Development Bank. Thank you very much for your invitation. I'd like to express my greetings to other panelists. I'm very happy to be here representing the IDB and underscoring the commitment that the IDB has and has had with the Global Alliance and the work that we're carrying out for development-related activities. Regarding the question, I'd like to underscore, as the other speakers have done, say that at present, Latin America and the Caribbean region, in order to promote efficient cooperation for development, is facing a challenge of a multiplicity of very grievous crises. COVID, climate crisis as well, and migratory flows and conflicts. And so these are having multifarious impacts all throughout the region. And for example, this heterogeneous in nature, and we are seeing a scenario where we have seen an increase in the complexity, and also budget and fiscal questions. So all of this gives rise to risks and also a risk for the private markets. And so as my colleagues have said, we have to find models whereby we can cooperate in a more effective way. But I'd just like to focus on the main effects that we're seeing brought about by the war, the invasion of Ukraine by the Russian Federation, the impact this is having upon us. Inflation, of course, food insecurity, poverty, problems of energy, and also the financial markets as well, and also problems in the budget and commercial, monetary systems. We have to face these questions. We have to especially look at the price of food, of foodstuffs, because we're seeing that there could be a 20% increase in the cost of foodstuffs. These are figures, the figures that we are, of course, calculating. We've seen in the Development Bank, but if you look, also increase in poverty as well, perhaps increasing by 5 percentage points of poverty. And also, if you look at the number of people living below the poverty level, some 10 million people. And I'm just giving you a snapshot, really. I want to be brief, but I won't be looking at the implications it can have, because we're working hard to support, of course, those countries that are member countries. But it's our hope that we will have greater demand for our resources, and also possibly providing subsidies as well for the vulnerable populations. And all of this means that we have to have a demand that's equivalent on the part of those countries for the cash transfers. That's the word that popped into my mind. But also knowledge-related products as well, technical assistance as well, that can be geared to the support. And the final point I'd like to look at here is, if you look at the instruments that we are using, we have to look at, for example, short-term stopgap measures and long-term ones as well, the interventions we can carry out on the public side, for example, in the COVID, or in the private sector, Privinvest as well, for innovation as well. Thank you very much indeed, Fazia. We have Jose Antonio Gonzalez Norris beside you, and Alvaro Calderon Ponce de Leon, as well, Director for International Cooperation, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Colombia, who will be giving us the final words for this round. But before that, I'd just like to see if there's a second round. We've identified a number of challenges as well on the agenda of efficient cooperation. Of course, it's facing difficulties to be received in a number of the countries of our region. And we've seen that there is some rejection or refusal of these efforts. We can look, for example, at the sustainable development the goals as well, Agenda 2030, other agendas, and also when it comes to finances. So we've seen also that there's been some reports given by countries in Latin America in the high-level political forum. Nobody mentioned the agenda of efficacy, the effective development agenda. This was not mentioned. And so we're having some problems when it comes to aligning the agendas. And so this is something I have to work on. And this is something I have to go into our final statement, final document. It's not just a question of inventorying the challenge. We have to find solutions to them as well. So we'll leave 3 minutes to each of our panelists so they can talk a little bit about this challenge and sketch out a concrete solution when it comes to seeing how we can move forward to arrive at efficient, effective cooperation. And so we'll start in the opposite order. In first order, let's start out now by Ms. Fazia Pusterla. Thank you. Thank you. Well, we're saying that it's important to have one single language which is accepted. The language is there. We have to set forth the development impact that is important. It's not only important for the public sector, the private sector as well. So we have to monitor and record the various contributions made for development contributions. That's fundamental in nature. And I'd just like to share with you what we're doing in the IADP, DB, when it comes to having a more rigorous registration of what's going on. We see that there are some methodologies and tools which make it possible for our partners, clients, and contributors as well, and investors, to be able to trust in the information that we share with them when it comes to the support as well. And first and foremost, what we do in each and every one of our projects that we carry out when it comes to crafting this as well, to look at a specific result that it can be measured. It has to be measured at the results or the number of indicators, and also work together with the ODS, the SDGs. And so, at present, when we actually craft or design the program, and with the partners of the project as well, we make sure that they're focusing on these Sustainable Development Goals. And so they're not only focusing on the SDGs, but also looking at the connection between them. And not only do we do this at the time of actually designing the project, but while it's being carried out, in order to see to it that we can make good use of these indicators while the project is being unfolded, and then we provide information regarding the results on an ongoing basis with the people who execute the project and also our partners as well. And so we can see how, in fact, the lineup can change, and this will have an impact on the next projects that we will be designing. Daniel, could you tell us how you see the program? Thank you very much. It's very complex. Talk about solutions to deal with this challenge of having more efficient cooperation. But from the program, I think a very important question, and it's for our member countries, is to see how we can rise to the challenge of cooperation, looking at things in a cross-cutting way, see how we can have innovation in a cross-cutting way, horizontal way. This is very important to have innovative models when it comes to interchanges, technical assistance, capacity building as well, technologies that are important for South-South cooperation, triangular cooperation as well, in an innovative mindset, and also reach out to the donors, the donor countries, and not only look at things in terms of official development assistance, but explore, break ground for different models of financing. And so this is linked to what I said earlier. We have to look at the role of the middle-income countries and the countries of Latin America in the all-embracing cooperation scheme of things. As I see, it's fundamental that we look at the global and regional challenges together, look at them together. In some cases, what we have already is evidence-based, but we have to look at things in more of a regional way and global way as well. And this would improve the response, and we could increase the efficiency of our actions within the light of South-South cooperation, triangular cooperation as well. When it comes to innovation, I think that we also have to find innovative funding mechanisms. And here, in my view, it's very important to move forward toward the setting up of regional funds, global funds, and also composite ones, some maybe through 2 countries or several countries. And we have to try to spur the input of other stakeholders as well. For example, civil society, the universities, private sector, reach out to them and see what they can do to increase their participation in the cooperation program. Now, what I've seen is there's a certain amount of experience in our countries, in Latin America, but working with other donors as well, and also that have focused more on Latin America, and they're seen as active agents, stakeholders in working in favor of cooperation. So I think this, in short, was just one last thing. to comply with Agenda 2030 and SDGs, of course, the pandemic has had an impact thereupon, and we have to find innovative financing schemes and models, and in this way, we should be able to see to it that Latin America can continue its Salta Triangular cooperation as well. Thank you very much. Now we'll hear from Cindy of Honduras, will take the floor. And the government of Madagascar has looked at the question of government through solidarity, and scope of solidarity, putting in place actions of efficiency, transparency, effectiveness, result management as well, and the national plan for the rebuilding of the country, working together with the United Nations within the framework of Agenda 2030. This has led us to transform our cooperation, sustainable cooperation policy within the framework of the focused on the gender and women, and being very focused on solidarity as well. And so we have a network that has actually identified a number of several hundred different villages to see what we can do, to see we can put in place products on programs on health and education. I say it has to be focused on women to have a society that's more fair, one of equity as well, and look at the question of relation of power between men and women. There has to be cross-cutting thrust as well, focused on gender, and nothing without us. Women have to be involved. And also with the principle of cooperation, as I said, efficiency in favor of development through the Agenda 2030 and the 17 SDGs as well. This is seen as a tool that's focused on the management of cooperation in favor of sustainable development in Honduras without leaving anyone behind. Thank you very much. And now we'll be hearing from Casco Moniz from Paraguay.
Okay, well, I think that what we really need to do is make sure we build better alliances and partnerships among different countries and also at the local level. So the mechanisms that have already been mentioned are very relevant. We think that these are quite strategic, for example, triangular cooperation. And for Paraguay over the past few years, since we're in a middle-income country, we have been working a great deal with certain countries, Germany, Spain, Korea, and then also we're working with the team from El Salvador, as well as other countries. So we've been working with them to promote cooperation and building on the traditional cooperation mechanisms that we already know. This is also a cross-cutting horizontal mechanism which helps us to exchange knowledge and best practices. And in that, I think the challenge is guaranteeing financial and technical resources to make sure that we can keep making progress in terms of cooperation. And what I think is necessary is to have support at the subnational level to tackle national challenges. And this is something that we focus on in the Technical Secretariat. We've been working with over 200 different municipal councils to work on sustainable development and cooperation. And then we're also working across the whole territory and coordinating with the National Development Plan. Another challenge, and something that we also could see as a solution, is to improve multinationals' support. And I think to do that, we need to strengthen national capacity, including all of the various different stakeholders, including the private sector, academia, civil society, and forging new alliances and partnerships. So we need to coordinate action among different beneficiary countries and carry out multilateral and international cooperation to make sure that everything works together and we all focus on having one single agenda and we coordinate all of our different national and regional efforts. Thank you. Thank you very much. Now I'm going to hand over to José Luis to give us a perspective from Dominican Republic. I think we agree with the great majority of these points that have been made. All solutions that are going to work need to start with regional unity, working together. So as we were saying earlier, we need to really rethink how we work and make sure that we channel resources towards the key needs that we have, we need to also focus on a strategic plan that allows us to create a whole regional space that we can work in. So that's the first factor. Secondly, the second factor is about how we can maximize South-South cooperation. This is what we can achieve in the immediate future in Latin America, because this will help us to exchange the experience that we've gained over the recent past, and then also we can exchange all of this and swap ideas with other countries so that we can use best practices to promote immediate develop. And this, of course, needs to go hand in hand with triangular cooperation, because some resources are necessary. We don't have all of these resources in Latin America, so sometimes we need to seek these elsewhere. So sometimes we do need traditional cooperation involving more advanced countries. So in the Dominican Republic, we already carry out a certain practice with El Salvador, and this involves sharing experience. We've also done this with Costa Rica and Chile on certain different topics. And so we've used all of this cooperation to make progress. Another important element is to do with creating a cooperation fund. There are some stakeholders that have started to suggest this as an idea, and we have proposed to create the creation of a type of fund that would help to finance all of these different processes that we in the region have identified as essential for development. And then lastly, we also need to involve the private sector. And of course, one of the other colleagues mentioned this earlier. If we want to innovate in terms of cooperation, we need to involve the private sector. And also, with including corporate social responsibility, this is something we can really involve. So we need to make sure that the private sector is not operating in a different space to the public sector. We need to really coordinate among the different sectors and really use this to promote work in the region. The private sector also needs to be fully committed in all of these processes. So those are the factors that will help us to build a more effective cooperation model and will really drive us forwards. I always say we need to really start looking locally and then looking outside, looking around the region and looking then further afield in that order. Thank you very much. Thank you. I'll now hand over to Her Excellency Adriana Mira. Thank you. I think everyone has mentioned very important and interesting points. So Luis has got the pro-tempore presidency at the moment, and that's I think he has some very interesting ideas. The creation of a cooperation fund is very important, and we are committed to working towards these goals. It's important to coordinate resources at the regional level. This is what will help us to be more effective in the way we cooperate. And as was said at the beginning, of course, some countries have been carrying out the voluntary review of the Sustainable Development Goals, and effective cooperation has been mentioned as part of that. In El Salvador, we've been forging strategic partnerships with the various different institutions to promote sustainable development, including civil society stakeholders. We also set up a National Council for Sustainable Development, which works among different institutions and carries out 4 main functions. The first of these is the monitoring coordinated by the presidency, and then mobilizing finance for development. Thirdly, programmatic and operational actions, and then also action across the whole territory. So each different country needs to take ownership of the projects. We need to also really look at how we're carrying out these voluntary national reviews. Now, as was said earlier, we only have 7 years left until 2030. And of course, in Central America, including the Dominican Republic, we have shared objectives and we have different needs in common. So we need to really look at how we're functioning as a region. So I would love it if we could really put ourselves forward as a whole region and set forth our needs and objectives. So I think in the United Nations system, we could really focus on that much more effectively. So, of course, I agree about the need for triangular cooperation as well. And we need to then also collaborate within the region. It's also crucial to develop technical capacity as part of international cooperation based on the SDGs and the United Nations system to make sure that we can really achieve effective development cooperation. It's also important to support middle-income countries to carry out development initiatives so that we can really carry out deeper work on developing our policies and bring about inclusive transformational approaches. Thank you very much. It's been a delight, and it's quite easy to moderate this panel with all these great contributions. So let's just look at the challenges and opportunities that have already been mentioned. So it's very interesting to hear what you've had to say. So we need to see what opportunities we have to strengthen the links among different agendas. So this strengthening process needs to bring together all these different agendas, and this can involve partnerships with new stakeholders, and this needs to involve inclusive partnerships. We also need to look at the outcomes of our actions. We need to have a results-based approach. It's also crucial to make sure that we hold everyone accountable. Accountability and reciprocal accountability is absolutely vital. So those are the 5 main principles of the Effective Development Agenda. Now, the 2030 Agenda has been at the heart of all of our work, and it offers a great deal of opportunities. So it's about bringing together those 2 different agendas. And then if you look at SDGs 16 and 17, for example, these are natural points of convergence, bringing together the effective development and agenda with the 2030 Agenda. Now, there's a list here of people who've requested to speak, in addition to our distinguished panelists. So we're going to hand over to those speakers for 2 minutes each. So let's start with one of our online participants, Mr. Mendoza, from the Ministry of Planning and Operations in ECLAC. So we've got him online with us now. I hope it's working. So we can't hear him at the moment. We can see him now. Yes. You have 2 minutes. Off you go. Oh, I'm sorry, we can't hear you anymore.
Vamos a ver si podemos solucionar este problema.
Let's see if we can solve this technical issue.
A ver, intentamos una vez más, Gerardo.
Let's try again.
Lamentablemente.
Unfortunately, we cannot hear you. Let's move on to the next person who's requested the floor. We'll hopefully come back to you in a moment if we can resolve that problem. So we also have Ilia Francea, Executive Director of the Mesoamerica Project, who's also with us online. Let's see if we can link up with Lydia. We can see you, Lydia. Let's see if we can hear you.
Buenas para todos.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me? Yes, we can hear you. You have 2 minutes. Thank you. Okay. I think we've transitioned from the world that we knew before to a new situation which was brought about by COVID-19. And this I would like to see as an opportunity. And I agree with what was said by the executive director of the Peruvian Development Agency, who said that international cooperation needs reform. And as we're thinking about all of these matters now, and we're having a bit of a brainstorm, I'd like us to think about the mechanisms and platforms at the regional level that we can use as a kind of laboratory of ideas, if you like, to see what we can think of, to see how we can coordinate all of these different efforts. So, for example, the Mesoamerica project. This is about integration and regional development. So we've done an analysis on how the Mesoamerican development cooperation is linked to the SDGs. So Mesoamerica is one of these different pieces that contributes to the other plans. We also work on the basis of consensus among different countries. And we coordinate among these different national plans and global commitments that our countries have signed up to. I'd also like to mention that, so what we do is we demonstrate how in Mesoamerica we involve all different development partners, and we also focus on South-South cooperation, principally involving Mexico and Colombia, and how they are connected to Mesoamerican countries. We also carry out cooperation involving the Melinda and Bill Gates Foundation, for example. So there's all these different stakeholders that are focusing on mutual cooperation. We're also raising awareness among private sector actors about issues relating to regional development and national development. I'd also just like to throw an idea on the table. We are tackling global challenges, and we're also dealing with these deliverables on this real-time platform. We have all these different databases that shows us where schools and hospitals are located, as well as health centers, and where housing is being constructed. We also provide demographic data. So this is an example of how regional cooperation can also provide these deliverables that can be used by all different citizens. I'd also like to mention that this product was also produced in cooperation with the IDB. In this region, we are showing that SDG 17 can be met at the regional level. We're trying to revitalize the way we work and rethink the way we work. We need to tackle these shared challenges, and we can find shared solutions to those challenges. Thank you very much, Lydia, from the Mesoamerica Project. And we also have online Ambassador Idia Peralta Cordero, Vice Minister for International Cooperation in the Foreign Ministry from Costa Rica. You also have 2 minutes.
Buenas tardes.
Good evening, Excellencies, Ministers, Directors, panelists, and experts. On behalf of the government of Costa Rica, I'm delighted to participate in this high-level regional dialogue for the Latin American region. Before the pandemic, the development model in the region still required significant investment to also tackle with issues related to technology and the balance of payments, as well as tackling poverty-related issues to try and tackle deepening inequalities. This also affected middle-income countries, and the pandemic has affected these countries significantly. We need to provide tangible proposals about how to solve these issues, using more integrated models for sustainable development. Costa Rica is chairing the South-South Cooperation Committee, and we believe that it's important for the countries in Latin America and the Caribbean to tackle development from a transitional perspective. It's important to bring about transformational change to promote our development agendas and tackle the results of the crisis. We think this is the way we should build a more effective development model and ensure that we take into account everyone's different specific characteristics. We also need to move on from the GDP-based approach, because there are other factors to take into account. Now, in Latin America and the Caribbean, there are many middle income and higher income countries. And it's important to take account of issues relating to concessional finance. It's important to renew international solidarity to overcome these challenges and achieve the 2030 agenda. Excuse me. Please, could you wrap up briefly? Of course. Thank you.
Estamos convencidos
We firmly believe in the need to tackle the various different risks and vulnerabilities. The current situation shows the need that our countries have to access finance and make sure that cooperation can be carried out without discrimination. Thank you very much.
Buenas tardes, Javier.
Good afternoon, Javier.
Ahora sí me escuchan.
Can you hear me now? Yes, go ahead. You have 2 minutes. Thank you, Javier, and thank you to the governments of Peru and Colombia for organizing this dialogue and for inviting ECLAC. As many of the panelists have said, it's very important that we place this conversation against the global context of crisis and the impact of the war. This is just the latest in a whole series of external shocks that have affected Latin America that started in the 2008 financial crisis all the way up to the pandemic just prior to the war. All of this has weakened economic development, human development, technological development, and slowed progress in productivity and technological development in Latin America and the Caribbean. Despite the very complex global situation, we are also having to address long-term structural challenges. We need to increase productivity, transform our economic structures, produce more jobs, and of course, adapt to tackle climate change and reduce the gaps in productivity and income between countries. We play a strategic role supporting the countries in the region to provide technical assistance and address key vulnerabilities in the transition process by technology transfer, planning and implementing investment policies, ensuring access to capital, and in so doing, increasing the availability of global and regional goods in the region. The countries in the region can continue to rely on ECLAC to support them with these various challenges and to help them seize the opportunities that come with the green transition. Thank you, everyone, and apologies for my previous sound issues. I'd like to thank the head of unit from the planning department at ECLAC, and I'd like to take some comments from the floor here. Shirley Denise Aguilar Pereira, Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs from Guatemala. Please go ahead. Thank you very much. I will try to be brief. It's an honor for me to be here at this dialogue, which I see is a mechanism that we should strengthen, as all the panelists underscored. We need to identify the challenge we have and what our internal process should be to address this reality. We are currently looking at this global architecture for effective development cooperation. And I'd like to share Guatemala's experience with the platform that we've developed. It's an integrated electronic platform that anyone can install on their cell phone. It is a tool for transparency and for accessing real-time information for making technical decisions on cooperation. It is a mechanism to assist the various actors in cooperation and to encourage dialogue. We have been able to work at regional level on this, and I think we still have a lot of work to do. But we share the same language and similar cultures, and this would help to bring the governments together. This is certainly not impossible, but what we need to find is a regional mechanism to boost this cooperation and internal dialogue. I agree with the other panelists that we have to align national development priorities and the international cooperation we receive and coordinate our efforts at regional level. I think we've done a lot of good work, but we have to be more agile and work faster to get the assistance to the people that need it the most as soon as possible. Thank you very much. We're now going to hear in the room from Marilena Fomar, Executive Director of the Multipolar Foundation. She is representing civil society. You have 2 minutes. Thank you very much for being here. First of all, on behalf of civil society, you can count on us for this multi-stakeholder dialogue. We represent the 10 million people that are suffering, that are experiencing this crisis. And we work to support this feminist and community-based approach that it was a pleasure to hear mentioned at a meeting like this. We want to help to build bridges. We call for us to all work together. We all have work to do. We have different forms of responsibility. We are civil society. We want to work with you, but we will always be critical. We are based in the field, on the ground. We have felt the impact of the pandemic on ourselves and on people on the ground. As civil society, we believe that the best social policy is decent work and social dialogue. We are the civil society that feels the struggle of all the people that we work with. And we believe that all the treaties, all the partnerships, all the agreements, Busan, Nairobi, etc., are all excellent, but that we also have to find new forms of cooperating. Just recently, we said it in Buenos Aires. We're here, we're ready to keep up this dialogue, but we all know that you have to demand your rights, and so we're asking the governments to drive policies to create a favorable context for what we are asking for, because our human rights defenders are being killed. Thank you very much for this very clear message. I do apologize because there were other requests from the floor at the last minute, but we cannot overrun the time that was given to us because we are the only thing in between the close of today and the evening that awaits us. And so I must apologize, but we do not have any time left to take any more questions. I'd like to give the floor to Mr. Álvaro Calderón Ponce de León, the Director for International Cooperation at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Colombia, for his closing remarks. Thank you, Javier. Yes, it is my sad role to be the one thing standing between you and your evening drink. So I will be brief, and I'd like to thank my colleagues on the panel for everything that they've said, because it's made my closing remarks very easy. But I would just like to pick up on a few key points that point towards solutions and options. Latin America and the Caribbean has experience that is very valuable. And as part of this whole process, we have created this eco-mix mechanism, which is very important. Our colleagues mentioned that Latin America and the Caribbean is a region facing multiple combined crises. We are one of the regions with the most inequality, with the most climate vulnerability. We have our small island states, we have the Amazon. We have a crisis of social development, of institutional capacity building, of violence. And solely using GDP to measure development is a mistake, because it doesn't take account of the multi-dimensional aspects of development. What about the sustainability of public policies and the fact that ODA is being reduced, concessional loans are being reduced? All of this has an impact on the deployment of sustainable public policy. We heard from Costa Rica, we heard from ECLAC as well about their own analysis, in-depth analysis of development in transition. And it's not just in transition, we also have specific development that is specifically focused within each country that's being analyzed. So we are facing this challenge of graduating into middle-income statuses. We heard about innovative sources, where we need to include the private sector, academia, and civil society, all relevant stakeholders that we can leverage. We spoke about aligning public policies and national development plans. If international cooperation is not aligned with national development plans, then it loses its value and it is not effective cooperation. We need very specific alignment with national development plans. Various panelists mentioned this need to combine or to coordinate both at national and regional level. We also heard about the need for funds to be created. We heard about SICA, the needs in the Caribbean region, and the need to be able to leverage these funds for development. We heard from Honduras about the development model. If we don't build a development model that is specific to us and adapted to our situation, that includes social inclusion, local development, participation, etc., it won't work. Cooperation generates mechanisms that complement public policies to drive development. And so again, this vision that is only focused on being middle-income countries is an error. Thank you very much for these closing remarks. This allows us to finish right on time. Let me thank the organizers for this forum. I'd like to thank Colombia and Peru for helping us to organize this, and thank all the panelists for being here. Thank you for inviting me to moderate it. And I think we've heard that we have a lot of opportunities and challenges, and that we have to keep working hard. We still have a lot of work to do to build a better world, and we are all doing it on a daily basis. Thank you very much for being here in the room, and to those of you who are online. And we're all working very hard to strengthen our region. Thank you.